Game key cards are the gift that keeps on giving for those of us that like to take a quick jab at Nintendo, but today's story gets even more bizarre. What if I told you that the Switch 2 has a hardware shortcoming that actually prevents some third-party developers from even wanting to choose a real game card to begin with? In other words, there is one limitation of the real Switch 2 game cards that is just bad enough to the point where some third-party developers are willingly choosing game key cards because it provides players a better experience. And here's the best part: Nintendo has an obvious solution to this problem, and they intentionally prevent game developers from doing it. I know that sounds insane, and trust me, I wish I was kidding, but today we're gonna dive deep to figure out what exactly is going on now with these games and game key cards. But first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Oh, hi buddy. Theo just jumped up on my desk while I was recording, and I think he said that ow he said that if you don't like the video, he's gonna keep biting me. Oh, and then he licks me. It's like he can't decide if he likes me or not. This story comes from John Linneman over at Digital Foundry. He posted something over on Blue Sky that has people talking, and if you guys don't know who John is, we actually talked about him in a video recently when he actually broke the news that some of the third-party developers at Gamescom were not getting dev kits for the Switch 2. If you guys missed that video on the channel, check it out. It's also pretty interesting. Anyway, let's jump right in here. John actually reposted a video from Video Games Chronicle, who said on first play, how well does Star Wars Outlaws really run on Switch 2? Here's the first 35 minutes in action. And John said that Star Wars Outlaws looks insanely impressive. He said it's doing more than expected, cutbacks are there, but honestly it's legit with a nice suite of RT features intact. Amazing work from Ubisoft here. It's also a solid game, but that's not really the story. The story is in the replies. Somebody says, but game key card, so true, brother, true. And John said, sadly, what other options were there in this case? And they respond, well, Ubisoft can afford the 64GB cards. You'd think they would go the extra mile for a port they seem to have actually put some work into, but I guess not. And John says, oh man, I figured it was too big, but you're right, it actually would fit. And by that he means Star Wars Outlaws is less than 64GB on the Switch 2, allegedly. I haven't verified that, but I trust John. He's from Digital Foundry. He goes on to say that Ubisoft cheaped out. The only possible other explanation is speed ? Cards are a lot slower, and that could cause problems for a game designed for SSD loading. Internal and SD cards are way faster. And this user responds saying, doesn't seem to create any issues with other games that are fully on the card. Even with Mario Kart World that has online modes, don't think it would matter much with a single player game. And actually John responds saying, well, we haven't seen any other games on card that were designed for fast storage yet. Still, they're probably just being cheap. And this is where Rob chimes in. Now Rob is actually an Ubisoft employee who is, I guess, according to this, the audio architect for Snowdrop. Snowdrop is actually the engine that Ubisoft helped create for a lot of their games. I think The Division was the first game that Ubisoft used Snowdrop for. And Rob goes on to say that this Snowdrop engine relies heavily on disk streaming for its open world environments. And when he says disk streaming, what he's referencing is effectively the game pulling the data from the internal storage of, let's say, the PlayStation 5 or your computer. So according to him, the engine relies heavily on this specific process for its open world environments, and we found the Switch 2 cards simply didn't give the performance we needed at the quality target we were going for. I don't recall the cost of the cards ever entering discussion, probably because it was moot. And then John goes on to say that, hey, it looks like he was right. Then we get a really interesting reply from a user who goes by the name Nintendo Patents Watch, and they actually replied saying, I noticed one thing in the Switch 2 game card patents, see my last thread, but wanted to verify it first. After consulting with someone knowing more than I, it's confirmed that one, game card 2, which by the way, that is effectively the second iteration of the Switch cartridges. Okay, so that is effectively the Switch 2 game cards, communicates with the system on a chip via embedded multimedia card standard. Now, I actually, looking at the sort of source here, I know this is in Japanese, so I can't translate this perfectly. Looking at the source here, I don't know if it is actually eMMC standard or if it's like adjacent or it's effectively eMMC standard. Again, you can let me know if you speak Japanese in the comment section below what this specifically says, but effectively it doesn't really change anything. What seems to be the case here is that the Switch 2 game cards communicate at whatever the eMMC standard actually is, and eMMC's max data transfer rate, hence the cards transfer rate, so the Switch 2 game cards transfer rate, is 400 megabytes per second. So if you want to learn more about this, Nintendo Patents Watch actually adds a couple of more pieces of information here, but what this actually means is that, you know, you might be looking at this and saying, okay, 400 megabytes a second, like that's actually pretty fast. It's like 4 or 5 times faster than the Switch 1 transfer rate, right? So like the Switch 2 game cards are significantly better than the Switch 1 game cards, just objectively, right? But for comparison, the read speed of the internal storage of the PlayStation 5 is like over 5 gigabytes per second. 5 gigabytes per second, which is way better than the sort of data rate or the read speed of the 400 megabytes per second of the Switch 2 game cards. And this has been proven, of course, with various tests that you can see over on YouTube. Now, this video was posted 2 months ago by the user 4416Y, and they're comparing the internal storage of the Switch 2 to the game card of Mario Kart World to a SanDisk, Samsung, or Lexar micro SD Express card. Okay, and this is literally just comparing the load times of all the different options here, and as you can see, the load speed of the game card is about 50% slower than reading the game from the internal storage of the Switch 2. So we've known since launch that the read speeds and the data transfer rate from the card is a lot slower than the internal storage of the Switch 2, and by extension it is also much slower than the read rate of the PlayStation 5. And that brings us back to what Rob said in response to John's original post here. Rob said that Snowdrop, the engine that Star Wars Outlaws is built on, relies heavily on disk streaming for its open world environments, and he elaborates further down below in an additional reply. He says, I think if we designed a game for Switch 2 from the ground up, it might have been different. As it was, we'd built a game around the SSDs of the initial target platform, so that would be like the PlayStation 5, for example, and then the Switch 2 came along a while later. In this case, I think our leadership made the right call, and what Rob is referring to is that leadership said, okay, based on how the game is actually already built for the PlayStation 5 and other consoles, if we're gonna port this to the Switch 2, the best thing that we can do is put it on a game key card. Even though it fits on a cartridge, it will perform a lot worse off of that actual cartridge. And so in order to prevent players from having a horrible experience playing Star Wars Outlaws, they went the route of just saying, okay, forget it, we're going to do a game key card, you're going to download it to your storage, and it's going to load a lot faster, as we see in multiple tests online already. But I know what you're thinking, right? There's a really obvious solution to this problem, and if you look at this screen long enough, you can start to figure it out, especially if you have a PlayStation 5 and you know how the discs work for the PlayStation 5. And the answer is, when you put a disc into your PS5, a lot of games will still require that you install the data to the internal storage of the PS5. Why is that? Well, for this exact reason. The games can pull data a lot faster from the actual internal storage of the PS5 compared to reading it off the disk every time they need to fetch that data, right? And if we look at the Switch 2, this same thing is true. So then you could say, oh my god, the answer is so obvious. How about when you buy a physical cartridge with the full game on the cartridge, what if Nintendo just let you install the game to your internal Switch storage because it's faster, just like a game key card, and then you have the best of both worlds, right? I mean, you've got the full game on the cartridge and you get the better load speeds of having it loaded into your internal storage. That's literally how it works on the PS5. Like, I know we're talking discs versus cartridges, so it's a little bit different, but like effectively it is the exact same process. Why doesn't Nintendo just let them do that? And the answer is, I don't know. It's probably because of like anti-piracy or something, or DRM, or I don't really know how it works, but Nintendo just doesn't let game companies companies do this. This is just, at least at the time of recording this video, that's just not a thing. You can't buy a physical cartridge like Mario Kart World or Donkey Kong Bonanza and then install the game to your internal storage. It just, Nintendo doesn't let you do that for some reason. And so games like Star Wars Outlaws are kind of screwed. They have no choice but to use a game key card if what they want is the faster loading speeds and pulling of data from the internal storage. Now, this again, as was mentioned in the post over on Nintendo Patents Watch at the very bottom here, they say the scenario should be exceedingly rare though, because Cyberpunk 2077 runs fine from a game card 2, aka a Switch 2 game card. So what Nintendo Patents Watch is saying is that, like, man, a game that needs faster than 400 megabytes per second, like if Cyberpunk can do it, then surely anybody can do it, right? And look, I'm not a game developer, I'm not an engineer, I don't know too much about this stuff in depth. So if anybody who knows more about this knows the right answer, you can comment down below. But maybe this is actually more of a commentary on Ubisoft's engine here, the Snowdrop engine. Maybe that's like the real problem here. Like, does this engine rely so heavily on it? Or like maybe it's just better that way. I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert here. I'm a goofball on YouTube. Like, what do I know? Maybe it's Ubisoft, because like Cyberpunk can do it, so how come Ubisoft's engine can't do it? Cyberpunk looks pretty good on the Switch too, right? I don't know. You guys can let me know in the comment section below if you know the answer. But like, man, it's kind of crazy that like the Switch 2 game cards are so much better than the Switch 1 game cards, and yet some games like Star Wars Outlaws are still bumping into this limitation. And to be clear, again, I don't think this is going to be that big of an issue moving forward, just like was posted by Nintendo Patents Watch, especially for games that are built from the ground up with the Switch 2 in mind. They will probably consider that when they're making these games, or at least I would hope so, right? But like, the real question that I have is like, why won't Nintendo just let games install to the internal storage, especially if they know it's a better experience? They built the hardware, they know the specs, right? We're over here guessing and questioning all this stuff because we have to rely on like third-party tests and things like Digital Foundry to figure this stuff out publicly, right? But Nintendo knows all this stuff on the back end. So if they know that, why don't they let game developers do this? Like, especially because think of it like this, right? If they let Star Wars Outlaws actually install the game to the internal storage from a real game card instead of needing a game key card to do that, well, Nintendo would probably sell more real game cards. Do you understand? Like, Nintendo actually makes money when they sell a 64 gigabyte game cartridge to these third parties, right? So it's like, Nintendo, it's kind of in your financial best interest to get as many companies as possible buying the actual game cards from you, right? Instead of opting for a game key card. So it's like, I don't know, maybe that profit is negligible to them, but I mean, we're talking about Nintendo. A lot of their decisions lately have been clearly very profit driven. And so like, you would think that they would want to maximize that profit there, especially because there's been so much backlash to game key cards. That's another reason why I think that maybe they would want more third-party games to use their actual game cards. I'm not really sure, but like, I don't know, to me, and again, I'm a goofball on YouTube, I don't know what I'm talking about, right? I'm not an expert on this stuff. So again, you guys can let me know in the comments if I'm wrong about this, but like, wouldn't it be an obvious solution to just let the game card install the data to the internal storage, and then problem solved, we get the full game on the cartridge and we get the faster load speeds? Let me know if I'm wrong about that. And I feel like it's kind of ironic that this benefit of game key cards comes less than 2 weeks since we learned that the Nintendo Switch 2 game key cards are not eligible for preservation by Japan's National Diet Library. So this news actually dropped while I was moving to this apartment, so I couldn't cover this here, but the National Diet Library in Japan stores over 9,600 Japanese video games in proper archival conditions. So the National Diet Library is a key institution for domestic game preservation in Japan, and they released a statement basically saying that Nintendo Switch 2 game key cards will not be eligible for preservation. The NDL is one of the largest libraries in the world, and it's also Japan's only legal deposit library, meaning that it actually mandates that domestic publishers submit copies of all new publications for collection and preservation, and they require that these publications submit their best and most complete works. Now, of course, this really only applies to publishers in Japan that publish Japanese games, right? So like things like Nintendo, but I don't think Star Wars Outlaws would even apply here because Star Wars Outlaws is not a game that was made in Japan, right? So I don't think this falls under that requirement here. But the point is that like this library of media preservation in Japan looks at game keycards and says, well, okay, well, there's nothing to preserve here. Like what are we going to preserve? Like the box art? Like that there's nothing on the card. There's nothing here. Of course we can't preserve this. What is there to preserve? There's nothing here, right? And so this story kind of reinforced the preservation aspect of game keycards and how they are horrible for preservation. They literally are one of the worst possible ways to obtain a video game if what you care about is preserving the actual game itself. So even massive national libraries like this can't do anything about this in terms of game preservation. And as we know, lots of old games, I mean, lost media is a big thing, especially on YouTube. A lot of YouTubers blew up off of lost media and trying to find and search for lost media, and games are no exception. Plenty of games are considered lost media. They don't exist anymore. And so the reality of the situation is that if games aren't properly preserved by places like Japan's National Diet Library, one day we may lose some of these games. Now, is it going to be the big AAA releases? That's unlikely, right? But I mean, if the only copy we ever get is a digital one, then like how could we preserve it? There's just, I mean, like there are ways, of course, you could put all the code on a storage thing, whatever, but like the point is, in its official form, it would be nice if the games were fully on the card. I'm sure that Japan's National Diet Library would prefer that as well. It makes their job a lot easier. So game developers for the Switch 2 are in a tough spot here, right? Like if they care about game preservation, especially in places like Japan and for these national libraries, well, they ought to put the full game on the cartridge, but there's literally a downside to doing that. Like as we see with Star Wars Outlaws, there is a physical limitation to those game cards. So now it's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, right? Like you want the full game there, but you also want the best possible performance. And so the solution seems pretty obvious to me, but Nintendo doesn't let you do that either. So it's like, what are we supposed to do, man? I just had to post about this because this is actually hilarious how in this one specific scenario, game keycards actually come out ahead. They're actually better than the real game cards on Switch 2, which is just hilarious. So let me know what you guys think about this in the comments section below. And while you're down there, consider dropping a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel a ton. It helps me beat the YouTube algorithm, and we are a tiny channel, so any support and engagement down below helps out a ton. If you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel. I know a majority of you guys are not subscribed, and click the bell if you want more breaking gaming news. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.